Okay, so you're here with us because you really wanna like understand the world like better, right? Like
Yeah,
more thoroughly.
yeah.
You wanna connect all the dots without getting like lost, and just like endless information.
Right.
You want those aha moments that make things click and honestly, that is exactly what we're about today.
Yeah, for sure.
Today, we are going to be diving deep into some like really fascinating material that you flagged for us.
Yeah, this is gonna be pretty intense.
It's insights from Clif High's recent Man in America interview.
Yeah, it's a long one, but you were particularly interested in his perspective on the whole like global situation and
Yeah.
especially the economy.
Yeah, and where things might be heading.
Yeah, exactly. His interview really did cover like a vast landscape. So many things we got to unpack.
It did.
Our current like historical context, central bank digital currencies, the possibility of fiat currency collapse.
Yeah, what does the future hold for the dollar?
Right, the emergence of new monetary systems, like what's going to happen.
Yeah.
The trajectory of civilization in general.
Yeah, he covered a lot.
And even the potential uncovering of like long-held secrets. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is a really comprehensive set of ideas.
Really is.
Now, for those of you who might be like coming across his work for the first time, Clif High has developed a really unique way of looking at the present and even like anticipating future events.
Yeah, this is the part that I know kind of throws some people off.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting how he does this.
Yeah, he analyzes patterns in language used online.
Yeah,
And I know that might sound a bit unusual, but he does have a pretty notable track record.
he does. He's made some like really significant calls, like predicting 9/11.
Yeah.
And more recently, even the banking issues that we saw back in March of last year.
Like, how does he do that?
It's really quite fascinating. His work isn't based on like traditional, economic forecasts or political analysis.
Right.
But instead, it grows out of decades of studying language
Oh, wow.
as a fundamental way that we express emotions, with factual communication often playing kind of a secondary role.
So emotions first, facts second.
Yeah, his core belief is that our collective emotions, as they like manifest in language, actually telegraph potential future developments.
So our goal today is to try and really unpack like the core insights from Clif High's perspective in this interview.
Yeah, let's do it.
We want to help you guys grasp his understanding of these potential global shifts
Right,
and identify what he sees as the most critical aspects for us to be aware of right now.
for sure, because he covers a lot of ground in this interview.
He does. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. So, what are the origins of this rather unconventional methodology that Clif High employs?
Well, his thinking evolved over quite some time.
Okay.
Early on, he came to realize that language serves primarily as a vehicle for emotional expression.
Oh, interesting.
So while factual information is conveyed, the underlying driver is often our emotional state.
Okay.
And this understanding was further sharpened by his involvement in martial arts.
Martial.
Yeah, he observed the subtle telegraphing of moves and intentions in combat.
Oh, wow.
And he recognized parallels in how people communicate verbally.
Telegraphing in language, that's a really interesting way to think about it.
Isn't it?
It's like we're subconsciously hinting at things to come.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And his technical background also played a crucial role here.
Okay.
He has significant experience in programming, including work in the telecommunications industry,
Yeah.
specifically with SS7, which is like a foundational protocol for much of our global phone and internet infrastructure.
Okay.
So this technical expertise gave him the ability to really conceive of and develop systems for processing massive amounts of linguistic data.
So it's this blend of martial arts intuition,
Right.
understanding those subtle tells,
Yeah.
combined with a deep technical understanding of data processing.
Yeah, it's not a combination you encounter every day.
They don't. It's pretty unique.
Yeah, and then there's this pivotal experience he talks about during a lightning strike on an airplane.
Whoa.
The core of his language theory crystallized.
Interesting during a lightning strike.
Yeah, he says this event solidified his understanding of the fundamental nature of language in what he felt was a profound way.
Okay. Wow.
And following this, he embarked on developing a large language model.
Okay.
However, unlike typical models designed to analyze facts, his was specifically designed to extract the emotional content embedded within language.
So he essentially built a machine to read our collective feelings.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does a bit, doesn't it? The underlying principle was that humans unconsciously reveal their future expectations and perspectives through the emotional tone of their language.
Okay.
And initially, the timing accuracy of his predictions varied,
Okay.
sometimes remarkably precise, other times with significant differences in the timeline.
Okay.
However, he consistently observed that the events themselves often unfolded in ways that the language had previously indicated.
So it was like getting an early, sometimes slightly out of focus emotional weather report for the future.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
What happened as the internet evolved?
Well, the rise of internet censorship, particularly around the Obama administration, presented a major hurdle.
Okay.
Initially, he struggled to maintain the effectiveness of his model, not fully appreciating the extent to which deliberate censorship was impacting people's ability to freely express their emotions online.
Right.
So this filtering of online discourse disrupted the raw emotional data streams that his model relied on to identify connections and previews of future events.
So the natural flow of unfiltered emotional expression online started to get restricted.
Exactly.
Okay.
Eventually, the effectiveness of his comprehensive large language model diminished due to this pervasive censorship.
Wow.
So his current methodology has adapted to focus on analyzing emotional intensity metrics that can still be derived from language even within the constraints of censorship.
Okay.
He cites his prediction of the recent banking turmoil as an example of this ongoing capability to identify emerging trends.
So even with these filters, he's still able to discern significant signals
Yes.
within the linguistic data.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is. And what is his overarching view of humanity's current state?
Well, his perspective is that our conventional understanding of ourselves, what he terms the normie understanding, is fundamentally flawed.
Okay.
He believes we are on the verge of a revolutionary reset of our consciousness.
Wow.
He anticipates a significant peak of this reset occurring in early May, followed by a fading in June,
Okay.
with a more substantial return in 2026 that could potentially last for decades.
A consciousness reset.
Yeah,
That sounds incredibly significant.
it's a big one.
What does he identify as the driving force behind this?
He attributes it to the impending collapse of the fundamental systems that underpin our perception of reality. Consider this: if our understanding of the world relies on things like a stable financial system, and that system begins to fail, it compels us to question our basic assumptions about how the world works.
It does.
As multiple foundational systems weaken or collapse, this questioning becomes widespread, leading to this profound shift in collective consciousness.
Right, because it's like if the rules of the game we've all been playing suddenly change, we have to reevaluate everything we thought we knew.
Exactly. It's like if this stage set of our lives suddenly gives way,
Yeah.
we're forced to confront the underlying reality.
Yeah. It's a rather unsettling kind of sense.
It is.
Now, you mentioned premonitions.
Yes.
What's his perspective on that intuitive sense we sometimes have?
He absolutely agrees that we are constantly receiving premonitions.
Okay.
He uses this really intriguing analogy, describing our brains as emulsified oil antennae filled with microcrystals that vibrate and interact electrically, which he believes is the basis of thought.
Okay, so our brains as like these tiny crystal receiving stations. I like that imagery.
It's pretty wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
And his explanation goes even deeper. He suggests that our skulls themselves have a crystalline structure, making them somewhat permeable to emotional waves from the outside world. He points to the common experience of hunters or fishermen having an almost sixth sense about their surroundings, beyond what their five physical senses can tell them, as evidence of this innate ability to pick up subtle, nonverbal cues.
Right.
You mentioned your own belief in premonitions. So does this idea of our brains acting like these antennas resonate with your understanding of how those intuitive feelings might arise?
Yeah, it actually does. It's much more tangible than just some like vague gut feeling.
Right.
But he did caution against blindly trusting every intuitive flash,
Yes,
right?
he did. He warns against accepting every impression without careful analysis.
Right.
He uses the example of waking up in a military barracks, where a pervasive negative mood might simply reflect the collective emotional state of the group, rather than a personal premonition of a specific future event.
Okay.
So he emphasizes the need to critically evaluate these feelings and consider their potential sources before interpreting them as genuine glimpses of what's to come.
So intuition's real, but we need to be discerning about its meaning.
Yeah, context, he says, is key.
Okay, context is key. Now let's talk about his perspective on time and predictions, which sounded a bit outside the conventional understanding.
Yeah, he's very firm on this time as we typically conceive of it, with a distinct past, present, and future doesn't actually exist in that linear fashion.
Okay.
For him, time is fundamentally experienced in the ever-present now.
Okay.
Consequently, his predictions aren't about seeing a future that is already fixed and laid out, but rather about sensing approaching events earlier than our conscious minds might register them,
Oh, okay.
like feeling a change in the air pressure before a storm arrives.
So it's less like looking into a crystal ball and more like being highly attuned to the subtle shifts and currents of the present that indicate likely future outcomes.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
a really nuanced but crucial distinction.
It is.
Now let's move on to this wheel of emotion concept that plays a significant role in his analytical framework.
Right, so he built upon the foundational work of Robert Plutchik,
Okay.
who developed a basic wheel of motion outlining primary emotional states.
Okay.
But Clif High expanded this model, incorporating a greater range of emotions and adding an additional layer to the wheel.
Okay.
However, his most significant insight was connecting the center of this expanded wheel to pre-sayings and common body language cues that humans exhibit.
Like what?
Those seemingly random little phrases we use, like, my palm is itching,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is often associated with expecting money, or my ears are burning, suggesting someone is talking about you.
Right.
Those quirky little superstitions.
Yeah, he believes those are subconscious leaks of emotional information from the future.
That's precisely his theory.
Wow.
He posits that these phrases are how we subconsciously attempt to articulate emotions that are emanating from potential future events.
Okay.
He has compiled extensive databases linking these specific phrases and their various combinations to corresponding emotions on his expanded wheel of emotion.
Right.
He then integrates his large language model of general internet language with this specialized model of pre-sayings to identify recurring patterns and correlations.
So he's looking for these specific emotional keywords and phrases bubbling up
Yeah.
within the vast ocean of online communication.
Exactly. And he also developed a system for estimating the timing of potential events based on the type of language he observes.
Oh, interesting.
So there's immediacy language indicating events likely to occur within a time frame of 3 days to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Then there's midterm language suggesting events between the end of week 3 and approximately 19 months out,
Yeah.
with a higher concentration of activity typically occurring in the initial 6 months of that period.
Okay.
And finally, long-term language points to events 19 months or more into the future.
So different patterns of emotional language seem to carry different time horizons.
Yeah,
That's a really ingenious system.
it is.
And you mentioned that the early days of the internet had a particular influence on his long-range forecasts.
Yeah, they did. When he first began this work, the internet was in its relative infancy and undergoing a massive wave of digitization.
Right.
Individuals were being compensated to digitize vast quantities of historical data, like books, government records, library archives.
Yeah.
This surge in digital conversion led to his early language analysis being disproportionately weighted towards long-term language.
Okay.
While he was aware of this digitization trend at the time, he didn't fully grasp the extent of its impact on his data.
Okay.
As a result, many of the long-range forecasts he made in the early 1990s predicting events 18 or more years in the future are, according to him, now beginning to materialize.
So the digital echoes of the past are, in a way, shaping our present.
That's how he sees it, yeah.
That's a truly fascinating and somewhat mind-bending thought.
It is.
Now let's shift our focus to the present day. What is his perspective on our current historical juncture and the overall economic outlook? It sounds rather ominous.
It is.
Yeah.
He emphasizes that we are rapidly approaching a point in history that lacks any true precedent.
Okay.
While we might be tempted to draw parallels between our current challenges and past depressions or recessions,
Right.
he believes that these historical comparisons will offer only limited guidance,
Okay.
because the nature of what we're facing is fundamentally different in scale and scope.
Different in what specific ways? We've certainly experienced significant economic downturns throughout history.
Yes, we've witnessed currency crashes before,
Right.
even multiple times within the United States.
Yeah.
And the British pound has also experienced significant collapses.
Right.
However, these events typically occurred in a more localized or regional context.
Okay.
What Clif High anticipates is a pan-global event where the collapse of the Federal Reserve note will simultaneously impact roughly 1/3 of the planet.
Oh, wow.
He suggests that in the aftermath of this, a new understanding of the dollar, a dollar revealed to us, will emerge.
A dollar revealed?
Yeah,
That sounds rather unsettling.
it does. And when he uses the term peak government,
Okay.
he isn't necessarily saying that government structures will disappear entirely,
Oh.
but rather that their power influence and capacity to effectively manage or control events have reached their zenith and are now in a state of decline.
Okay, so a waning of power.
Yeah, you could say that.
And what role does he see governments playing in this unfolding scenario?
As I mentioned, he believes we've already passed this peak government phase
Okay.
and are now entering a protracted and likely messy period of decline that could extend for many years.
Okay.
While he doesn't foresee the physical dollar currency vanishing overnight,
Okay.
akin to Confederate money,
Okay.
he suggests that digital dollars held in bank accounts could potentially simply cease to exist.
Oh, wow.
He also raises the very real threat of hyperinflation,
Yeah.
where the currency retains its numerical denominations but loses its purchasing power so rapidly that it fundamentally alters how people behave in terms of spending and saving.
Hyperinflation, that nightmarish scenario where your life savings can become worthless in a matter of days.
Exactly, and he's been seeing the early indicators of this trend all the way back to the late 90s.
He saw that back then.
His data began to pick up these concerning trends as early as his 1997 analysis, which, as we discussed, ultimately contributed to his prediction of the 9/11 attacks.
Wow, that's a remarkably long fuse on this economic time bomb.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Now, he also mentioned a self-organizing collective that has been working to counteract some of these trends.
He did.
What can you tell us about that?
So he observes patterns within his data
Okay.
that suggest coordinated rather than purely organic efforts by individuals who anticipated the current crisis
Okay.
and have been proactively taking steps to mitigate some of the expected negative consequences.
So like a silent resistance operating behind the scenes?
Yeah, you could say that.
Can you give us an example of what he's referring to?
He points to the 1964 Act that permitted private ownership of gold certificates as a significant example. His interpretation is that this was a deliberate action taken to essentially tie up the gold reserves held at Fort Knox, potentially hindering the Federal Reserve's ability to utilize it freely as part of a move towards a central bank digital currency much earlier than what we are currently facing.
So for every strategic move made by one group,
Right.
there is a counter strategy being implemented by another.
That's his perspective.
It sounds like a very complex and multi-layered situation.
It is.
What's his overall timeline for how these events are likely to unfold?
He anticipates a challenging period of roughly 3 years, characterized by significant disruptions.
Okay.
However, he projects that we will begin to see emotional improvement around 2026,
Okay.
accompanied by positive physical manifestations, although these won't be universally experienced.
Okay.
He emphasizes that the recovery process will likely be a long and arduous one.
Right.
He also highlights the influence of what he terms weaponized Munchausen by proxy, essentially large-scale social engineering and manipulation, which he believes has profoundly impacted a significant portion of the social order.
Okay.
And this will need to be addressed as part of the societal healing process.
Weaponized manipulation on such a grand scale, that's a chilling concept to consider.
It is.
Now let's focus on the specifics of the brewing banking crisis and the potential collapse of the dollar.
Okay.
He seems to believe that the current issues we're seeing are just the initial signs of a much larger problem.
That is indeed his assessment. He confirms that the current instability within the banking sector is just the beginning of a more significant crisis.
Okay.
He specifically points to Deutsche Bank, Germany's largest financial institution,
Right.
as being particularly vulnerable due to its extensive involvement in the derivatives market, a risk he's actually been warning about in his analyses for some time.
Deutsche Bank, potentially another major domino in this financial chain reaction.
It's a big one, too.
Yeah.
He anticipates a contagion effect spreading throughout the financial system in the coming months, ultimately leading to the collapse of the debt-based fiat currency system, particularly the U.S. dollar,
Right.
and the cascading global repercussions that would follow, given its status as the world's reserve currency.
Of course.
He underscores the inherent instability of the derivatives market, which has grown to be many times larger than the underlying real-world assets, with complex interconnections that could trigger widespread failures if key players falter.
So the derivatives market, a vast and intricate web of financial obligations.
It's mind-bogglingly complex.
It certainly sounds incredibly fragile.
No, it is. He also observed the ongoing struggle of the Federal Reserve in trying to contain the situation,
Okay.
particularly in relation to European banks,
Okay.
and their increased reliance on overnight repurchase agreements, repos, to inject liquidity and try to stabilize the banking system.
Right.
However, he believes that these efforts are being undermined by a growing trend of individuals attempting to withdraw their cash from the system.
People voting with their feet, or rather with their withdrawal,
Okay.
signaling a loss of confidence. And what's his perspective on the role of precious metals like gold and silver in this economic climate?
He predicts a significant rise in the price of silver,
Okay.
potentially reaching $600 or more per ounce,
Wow.
and even suggests the possibility of it achieving price parity with gold.
Really?
Yeah, he attributes this to the breaking of long-standing price manipulation in the silver market,
Yeah.
coupled with the substantial and growing industrial demand for silver in key sectors like solar energy electric vehicles
Right.
and the production of semiconductors.
$600 silver, that would represent a dramatic increase from current levels.
It would be huge.
And what are the broader implications he foresees arising from the potential demise of the dollar as the global reserve currency?
He anticipates far-reaching consequences.
Like what?
China, for example, will have diminished incentive to continue exporting inexpensive goods to the United States.
Okay.
We can also expect significant increases in energy costs. Furthermore, there will be a compelling need to undertake a substantial reshoring of manufacturing capabilities and resource extraction within the U.S., a process that he believes will require significant effort and investment over multiple generations.
So the era of cheap imported goods and reliance on global supply chains may be coming to an end,
Yeah, that's what he sees.
necessitating a return to domestic production.
Yeah.
A really fundamental shift in the global economic landscape.
It is.
Now let's address the topic of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs,
Okay.
which I know is a concern for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned your worries about potential social credit systems,
Right.
increased surveillance.
Yeah, big concerns.
What's Clif High's take on this?
Shares the concerns about CBDCs and their potential to enable social credit systems and enhance surveillance, drawing parallels with the model being developed in China
Right.
and the statements made by the Bank for International Settlements.
The BIS.
Yeah, regarding a fourth expression of money that implies greater central control. However, his perspective diverges on the notion that the current economic collapse is entirely uncontrolled.
Okay, how so?
He believes that the elite are actually accelerating a collapse that they had initially anticipated occurring around the year 2030.
So it's not just a crisis they're responding to, but one they are actively pushing forward.
That's his view.
That's a rather unsettling interpretation.
It is a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it aligns with some of his earlier predictions.
Okay.
He notes that back in the year 2000, his analysis indicated the emergence of a new form of money after 2005,
Okay.
which he now identifies as the advent of cryptocurrency in 2008.
Okay.
During that period, his data consistently pointed towards a crash of the U.S. dollar and the subsequent offering of 3 replacement currencies.
Okay.
His forecast was that the first 2 would be rejected by the public, and the third would also be immediately rejected amidst a significant conflict.
3 strikes and the new currency proposals are out.
That's the prediction.
Wow, that's quite a specific prediction.
It is.
Now, what about the challenges his language model faced in interpreting the concept of digital currency back in the early 2000s?
Right. So in the early 2000s, the underlying technological infrastructure and widespread public understanding of digital currency were not yet well established.
Right.
This made it difficult for his large language model to find clear and consistent linguistic links and real-world context for the concept.
Okay.
While his analysis indicated that a new monetary system was on the horizon and that it would likely be digital in nature, the specific details remained somewhat unclear due to the lack of concrete examples in the real world at that time.
So the language was there like a seed,
Yeah,
but the full picture hadn't yet developed in reality.
that's a great way to put it.
Now, how did that change?
Well, around the period of 2005 to 2007, he began to see indications in his data of a people's money emerging, which he later connected to the rise of cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
In fact, he invested in Bitcoin very early on, before it even reached a price of 1 US cent, based on his analysis suggesting a decentralized form of currency for international settlements with the potential for an enormous future valuation
Okay.
in the range of $1 million per unit.
He was in on Bitcoin practically at its inception.
Yeah, pretty much.
That certainly lends credence to the predictive capabilities he claims.
It does. Now let's move on to what he refers to as the big ugly.
Okay, the big ugly. He seems to agree with your perspective that this period isn't just the end of an empire,
Right.
but a necessary process of dismantling old corrupt systems.
Yeah, he uses the analogy of a body undergoing detoxification and experiencing the Herxheimer reaction,
Okay.
where symptoms temporarily worsen as the body eliminates toxins,
Right.
to describe what the body politic is currently going through.
Oh, okay.
He believes that this period of upheaval is a necessary process of confronting and purging past issues, ranging from unhealthy food systems to environmental toxins, for genuine and lasting societal healing to occur.
So a societal spring cleaning, but one that's likely to be quite uncomfortable and even painful in the short term.
That's his view.
He views the current turmoil not just as a decline,
Right.
but as a painful yet ultimately valuable rite of passage for society.
Yeah, I like that way of looking at it.
He observes a noticeable increase in shrillness and fragility among those who are deeply invested in and attached to the old system,
Yes.
interpreting this as a manifestation of their fear of the impending changes and their inability to adapt to a world operating outside the familiar paradigms.
It's like they're clinging to a sinking ship.
Yeah, fear and resistance to what they perceive as the inevitable. He mentioned Deutsche Bank again in this context, didn't he?
He did, reiterating his expectation of a rapid deterioration in the coming months, with Deutsche Bank remaining a key point of vulnerability within the global financial system.
Right.
He also predicts cascading failures in government funding, starting as early as May to July, as the degraded value of the currency begins to significantly impact existing contracts, citing examples such as the ability to afford fuel for prisoner transport vans and school buses.
Basic governmental functions potentially grinding to a halt due to the erosion of the currency's value.
That's what he's suggesting.
That paints a rather stark picture of the potential near future.
It does.
His belief is that the parasitic class and the overextended bureaucracy will be among the first to experience significant disruption as their funding mechanisms collapse.
Yes, because their control, he argues, is heavily reliant on the stability of the corrupt banking system
Right.
and the continuous flow of fiat currency.
When that flow is significantly impaired, their systems will begin to seize up.
Precisely. Now, this part about the unveiling of hidden truths,
Yes,
using the UFO phenomenon as an example, is particularly intriguing.
it is.
This has been a consistent trend identified within his data,
Yeah.
going back to approximately 2003,
Okay.
which links the issue of unidentified flying objects directly to economic factors. His prediction is that the covertly funded infrastructure involved in reverse engineering UFO technology will face severe financial constraints and ultimately run out of money during the initial phases of the economic collapse.
Secret alien tech research facing budget cuts. That's a rather unexpected consequence of an economic downturn.
It is a bit ironic, isn't it? What does he anticipate happening as a result?
Yeah, what happens?
Well, his expectation is that scientists and personnel from these deep underground facilities will begin to emerge,
Okay.
potentially attempting to sell their knowledge and even physical alien artifacts in order to survive financially, leading to unprecedented disclosures.
Wow.
He even refers back to a specific forecast from 2003
Okay.
concerning food riots in the United States during the summer months, an unusual time for such events,
Right.
which included a specific detail about a riot in the Delaware-Maryland region that would spill over into a government facility where paper records related to UFOs would be discovered and subsequently disseminated to the public.
Summer food riots leading to accidental leaks of classified alien documents. That sounds like the plot of a rather outlandish science fiction film.
It does a bit, doesn't it? And he sees current indicators that align with this rather specific forecast.
He does. What are they?
He points to the fact that elements within the military-industrial complex are currently voicing concerns and complaints about delays in contract funding as a sign that these underlying financial pressures are already beginning to have an impact.
Okay.
He views this as part of the broader Big Ugly Ugly, which he sees as a great disclosure of the truth across numerous domains, as the lies and deceptions underpinning old institutions are exposed by the lack of financial resources and the crumbling of established systems.
Right.
This widespread collapse of falsehoods, he believes, has the potential to usher in a more truthful understanding of science history and how we as humans should live.
So the unraveling of the financial system could inadvertently lead to the unraveling of other long-held secrets and deceptions.
This is predicting.
Now, he made a distinction between truth and facts that I found particularly thought-provoking.
Yeah, he defines truth as more of an emotional resonance, a feeling of alignment, whereas facts are the verifiable realities.
Okay.
His perspective is that the coming period will involve a new truth emerging as people grapple with facts in new and profound ways, precisely because the truth in many instances has been deliberately obscured in the past.
So a new emotional understanding of the factual landscape.
Yes,
Dear.
exactly.
Okay.
He sees this shift as having the potential to be incredibly liberating, paving the way for the invention and creation of a new world, unburdened by the limitations and deceptions of the old.
That's a hopeful perspective.
It is. He personally expresses a sense of excitement about the coming decades despite the acknowledged challenges of the transition.
Okay.
Using the analogy of cleaning out a septic tank, an unpleasant but ultimately necessary process for a healthier future.
Okay, so a potentially painful but ultimately transformative reckoning with reality.
Yeah, that's a good way to sum it up. Now, shifting to the practical aspects, he offered some concrete advice for navigating this big, ugly period.
Okay. What were his key recommendations for individuals?
His primary and most immediate advice is to recognize that the fundamental crisis we are currently facing is monetary in nature.
Okay.
He strongly emphasizes prioritizing the acquisition of essential goods that will be needed in the future,
Such as?
such as food, water fuel, and provisions for maintaining electricity over simply holding on to cash, which he anticipates will continue to lose value rapidly.
Stock up on the fundamental necessities first.
Yes,
That seems like prudent advice in uncertain times.
it does. What about what to do with any financial resources beyond those essential supplies?
Yes. What should we do?
After securing essential supplies, his recommendation is to consider storing purchasing power in assets that are not tied to the traditional fiat currency system.
Okay.
His suggested order of potential appreciation is Bitcoin, followed by silver and then gold. Although he does state that all of these, and even copper, could serve as useful stores of value.
Bitcoin, silver, gold in that specific order of potential gains.
That's right.
That's an interesting prioritization.
It is. Were there any caveats or specific considerations he mentioned regarding precious metals?
Yeah, we're there.
Yes. He cautions against accumulating excessively large quantities of precious metals without a clear strategy for facilitating local trade
Right.
or a functional system for reconverting them back into usable currency at a later point.
Okay.
To illustrate this, he shares historical examples from periods like the Great Depression and various hyperinflationary episodes,
Okay.
such as a Bentley automobile being purchased with silver,
Wow.
land and houses being acquired with gold and silver,
Right.
and even a hotel being obtained with a single gold tip,
Wow.
highlighting how relative purchasing power can shift dramatically.
Right.
He also mentions the more recent example of Venezuela,
Okay.
where a small amount of silver could purchase a month's worth of food during their severe economic collapse.
So the focus should be on practical utility and facilitating local exchange, rather than just amassing large, potentially illiquid stores of wealth.
That's his advice.
Okay, now let's touch on the longer-term societal implications he discussed.
Okay.
What's his outlook for the next 10 years or so?
His prediction is that the approximately 75% of the population who did not take certain medical interventions will find themselves living in a significantly altered North America
Right.
and other Western republics within the next decade,
Okay.
assuming that a large-scale invasion by China does not occur, which he considers to.